my loves, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. Hi, hello, my name is Loey, and you guys seemed to love my last conspiracy theory video where I talked about some crazy conspiracy theories that were actually pretty believable about some of your favorite childhood cartoons and TV shows. When I was researching for that video, obviously I just kind of stumbled down the rabbit hole of some creepy and interesting and weird theories about things that I knew from my childhood. This can probably be its own series, and most likely will be now that I know you guys are into it. So here you go. These are more creepy, scary, but believable theories about your favorite childhood TV shows and movies. Number one is about one of my favorite TV shows from when I was a kid, and so it breaks my heart to talk about it, but it's still really interesting, and this is about the Fairly Oddparents. This theory is that Timmy's fairy godparents, or Fairly Oddparents, same, are not actually real whatsoever. They are metaphors in his head for Prozac and Zoloft, which are both antidepressants, and they're pretty much there to help him through his problems, but only until he doesn't need them anymore, which is an interesting thought. The entire concept behind the Fairly Oddparents is that when Timmy didn't need his fairy godparents any longer, they would go on to help someone else and to be some other kid's fairy godparents, but they were just there to help him until he didn't need them anymore. This makes sense because not only did they show up when he started having problems, he also gets into a lot of trouble when he abuses their so-called magic. This is a really interesting theory, and Butch Hartman, the creator of this show, is such like a lovely individual that I doubt that there's anything genuinely sinister or dark worked into this plotline, but still very interesting to think about. My second theory is also about the Fairly Oddparents, and it's that Timmy Turner's fairy godparents weren't real at all, kind of like the last theory. He's just a little kid playing pretend with his two fish. His godparents died in a car crash when he was much younger, so he basically gives his fish these personas that they protect him and help him and are there with him all of the time because he doesn't really have anyone to look out for him. I mean, his own parents clearly don't care very much. If you think about it, Timmy's kind of home life was really sad. I mean, his parents were total airheads, it seemed like, and never had time for him. His babysitter literally abuses and slaps him around all of the time, and he never tells on her. You know how when Timmy makes a wish, it doesn't really have any lasting power, so his wishes don't really seem to carry over from episode to episode? That's because they're all in his head, and so he has to undo them so that they're not really part of reality because they can't be. The darkest part of this theory is that his teacher, Mr. Crocker, made sexual advances at him, and that is why he's always after his fairies, which are joyful and good and pure. That part is really dark, and I don't believe that at all. There's zero evidence to support that. I don't believe that part of the theory whatsoever, and that just makes me really uncomfortable. But the rest of the theory is pretty interesting. I loved the Fairly Oddparents, and both of these theories would kind of fit into place because when we see Timmy as an adult eventually, his kids have Cosmo and Wanda as their fairy godparents. So maybe it's just the fantasy continuing on in his head. This next theory is on a show I didn't particularly ever set out to watch myself, but my brother, who is my little brother, was obsessed with it growing up, so I always inevitably wound up watching bits and pieces of it, and that is the show Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. The concept behind the show is that the home was in fact for imaginary friends, super straightforward, where they could all see and pretty much interact with each other. And this theory, I 100% believe. This is one of the few theories that I will like put everything behind. I believe this, I stand this, I would write this myself. And that is the theory that Frankie was never real. See, Madam Foster runs the Home for Imaginary Friends along with her 22-year-old granddaughter, Frankie. This theory is that as Madam Foster got older, she wished that she had someone in her life who was younger, who could do the chores and help her out and be her friend. If the only evidence was that Madam Foster is a lonely old woman, there really wouldn't be any legs for this conspiracy to stand on. My dog is throwing her bone all around the house. If you really pay attention, Frankie has no real life out of Madam Foster. No imaginary friends, nowhere else to be. Maybe Madam Foster wanted an imaginary friend of her own and imagined a younger version of herself. I mean, take a look at this photo right here where they're wearing the exact same clothes. What if this lonely old woman wanted her own imaginary friend and someone to hang out with? I wish my cat's butt was imaginary so he'd stop putting it in my face. There are some plot holes to this, such as Frankie eventually goes on a date, but if she is Madame Foster's imaginary friend, then she's all in her head anyways. I mean, she can do whatever Madame Foster wants her to do. On the reverse end of this, what if Frankie imagined Madame Foster? There are scenes where Frankie is a child and the imaginary friends can't age. So what if she's just keeping Mrs. Foster alive via the route of imaginary friend so that she doesn't have to tell anyone that she passed away? Next, we have a conspiracy theory about recess, which kind of mimics the conspiracy theory that I mentioned in the last video about Ed, Ed, and Eddie. This theory is that everyone on the 3rd grade playground is a dead child, and each of them represents a different point in history. When I first saw this, I thought it was totally far-fetched, like, oh great, another everyone is dead theory, or no one ever existed. But it is really interesting when you break it down. TJ died back in the 1930s when he was hit by a police car during a student walkout. His spirit lives on to basically tell kids to stand up for themselves and their rights. Mikey supposedly died in the 1940s after basically eating himself into a heart attack at the age of 9. I mean, I guess. Spinelli died in a fight back in the 1940s, and he's really the big protector and bodyguard of the group and just watches over everybody. Randall, back in the 1950s, was shot by someone who was basically beating up a 2nd grader because he told the principal what was happening and the dude literally shot him, apparently. Gus's story is that back in the 1960s, around New Year's, he was beaten by neighborhood bullies and consequently died. The Tylers, as well as the Ashleys, died back in the 1960s at the hands of a mass serial killer. Gretchen committed suicide in this theory in the 70s after losing to another student at the fair. The Diggers, Sam and Dave, died in the 80s after basically finding a coal mine on school grounds, and then in the 90s, Vince passed away in a mental asylum after trying to commit suicide. King Bob supposedly died in this theory in the early 2000s after being killed by one of the inmates in the 4th Street Correctional Facility. Is there a lot of evidence to back this one up? No, but still it's interesting to hear the backstory and how the holes are filled in someone's brain. And when you look at it by everyone divided into different time periods, it kind of starts to line up. Our next theory is pretty dark and sad and has some interesting proof behind it. If you guys remember Garfield, it originally started as a comic strip, and then eventually there were cartoons and a Garfield movie and so on and so forth. Garfield is all about a fat cat who loves to eat and is doted on by his owner John and has a constant rivalry with the family dog Odie. So back in the fall of 1989, Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, produced a strip of comics that were based on like a Halloween creepy storyline. Essentially, Garfield wakes up in an abandoned house. He was scared and freaked out, but when he finally accepted that he truly was alone, he woke back up in his owner John's house, and this raised a red flag for a lot of readers. Suddenly, they were left wondering if Garfield's reality was not real, and if he had been in that abandoned house the entire time. Maybe Garfield died or was slowly starving to death in that abandoned house and would escape to this fantasy world where he had a warm, loving home, a kind owner, a buddy to play with, and lots of food. Primarily lasagna, which is his all-time favorite. The creator of the series, Jim, did kind of laugh at this and thought it was hilarious and interesting, but has confirmed that it's not true. The series of comic strips around Halloween time back then wasn't canon. It was just kind of meant as a scary story. And it's pretty scary to think of poor Garfield without his lasagna. Dark though and interesting, and really makes you think, because do you think he ever would have admitted if it had been true the entire time? The last theory in this video may torment me the most, and it's because it is based on the movie My Neighbor Totoro, and I love everything and anything Hayao Miyazaki. I love Studio Ghibli, I love everything that they produce. Howl's Moving Castle is probably my favorite of all time, but My Neighbor Totoro is a classic, and in this theory, Totoro is supposedly the god of death. And before you completely turn off the video and give up on this last theory, give it a minute, because it's kind of interesting. The rumor is that Totoro is the god of death, so the people that can see him are actually close to death or already dead. What that means for the story is that when May goes missing and a sandal is found in the pond, Mei is actually drowned. When Satsuki is asked about the sandal, she cannot face the truth and lies about it not being Mei's. So she goes on a desperate search for Totoro, calling for him, and actually opens up the door to the realm of the dead herself. With Totoro's help, she finds her dead sister, and they together go to their mother's hospital. There, the only one who actually noticed that the sisters were there was the mother, who's also soon going to die. And in the ending scene, Satsuki and Mei don't have any shadows. Interesting, but there's actually a little bit of history to not necessarily back this up, but just kind of add to it. My Neighbor Totoro takes place in the Sayama Hills, and there is a famous murder case called the Sayama Incident. 2 girls turned up dead in this murder incident, and no one really knew what happened. But according to urban legend, one of the young girls saw a cat-like apparition before committing suicide. There's no evidence to back this up, there's nothing else, but it just sort of adds to the lore and makes for an interesting conspiracy theory. Studio Ghibli came out and made a statement saying none of it was true, but they did expand on the fact that Mei and Satsuki did not have shadows in the last scene, and that is because the film's animators decided that shadows were not necessary in this scene. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Have you ever heard someone say shadows weren't necessary for this? I mean, if you've created an entire film in which a character has a shadow, why would you leave the final scene without a shadow? That's how light works. You have a shadow. Everything has a shadow. My camera has a shadow. I have a shadow. My light has a shadow. My arms behind me have shadows. It's just really strange, makes for an intriguing theory, and that's gonna be it for this video. So my last video was 8 conspiracy theories, this was 6, but they were all pretty dark. So if you guys want more of these videos, next time I think I would like to do Disney themed theories, because there's the Toy Story theory, there are Aladdin theories, there are so many creepy cartoon theories with Disney. So let me know if you guys want that in the next video. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I love you all so much, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.